Hey everyone, and welcome to this short presentation on Latin American geography. I say short because my first attempt at this was like 17 minutes long. Here I'm going to try to keep it to 10 minutes or less. That's going to be my goal going forward for these slideshows, so we'll see how I do. As we work through an introduction to Latin American geography, what we're trying to do is set the scene. Think about what is the region and the place that we will be studying together this semester. So we need to consider these questions. Where is Latin America? That seems much more straightforward than we'll find that it is. Scholars differ in their opinions of what nations are included in Latin America. The term was actually coined by a French thinker in the mid-19th century with kind of colonial or imperialistic aims in mind, as France was looking under Napoleon III to expand its holdings into the Western Hemisphere, or at least have some economic and cultural control there. So he was trying to find these links through the idea of a Latin-based language and customs and traditions from European colonialism that linked Latin America to Europe in those ways. However, there's this thing called transculturation that we'll talk about a bit later that meant that indigenous peoples' lifeways had impacted the type of society that developed in Latin American nations. So it wasn't as simple as saying that everything just sort of transferred over through colonialism in terms of customs, in terms of even laws and the ways that empires worked. So I say all of this to point out that some scholars would not consider the Caribbean as part of Latin America for a variety of reasons. Some would not consider places like Suriname or French Guyana as part of Latin America either. And this has to do with their kind of different histories, their different local indigenous cultures, and the ways that they developed over time. So we need to think then as we go forward, how do we define this place and why? And how does that help us better relate to the people here and better understand them on their own terms? Second, we need to think about what the difference is between the notion of space or the concept of space and place, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. And then finally, what particular characteristics in terms of human, historical, and physical geography unite the various nations of Latin America? So first, let's think about this, what makes space into a place. The study of geography in general is the study of how we relate as human beings to the spaces around us, how we define the globe in terms of mapping it, but also in terms of the landscape, what we build, where we group ourselves in terms of culture or belief systems or even religion or whatever it might be, how we divide ourselves into neighborhoods in urban spaces or suburban spaces. So we define these things through our actions on a daily basis. We create places, we assign significance to places in our own lives for a variety of reasons. So geographers seek to study that and understand how and why we do that and what it means for relationships, for solving things like inequality, for understanding cultural norms and relations better. This map here, you may be thinking to yourself, oh, that's a map. Yes, this was Christopher Columbus's first map of Hispaniola, which is the island that includes Haiti and the Dominican Republic today. It doesn't look like much of a map. He was finding, from his perspective, a new space that he was trying to come to terms with, and in order to make it into a place that he and other Europeans could understand, that would be legible to them, they made maps, even these very primitive early ones of the coastline, as you can see here, in order to figure out where certain people were, where he might want to return to when he came again in his second and third voyages, and so on. And so something to think about then as we think about colonialism, which is a major theme in Latin American studies, is how indigenous peoples and Europeans, people of European descent, and their descendants, all conceived of the spaces that they lived in. Here's a map from 1639, so it's almost 2 centuries, a century and a half after Columbus, that we can see there was much greater understanding of the geography of this place. This one, of course, this is another European perspective on the Caribbean. Here we have Hispaniola in the center, Puerto Rico here, and Cuba off to the west, you can probably tell that based on our current understandings of geography, this still looks a little distorted. It's not perfect. It's no Google Earth image, but it's getting better. Also, Europeans created these kinds of maps so that they could lay claim to these spaces. They made them into their own places. They replaced indigenous names with their own names for things. And that may seem just innocuous or commonplace. Of course, they would do that, but it was a way of exerting power and authority and declaring these places to be their own. Indigenous people, of course, resisted this, and that's also a very key element of the stories that we'll be thinking about as we explore Latin America this term. We're also going to be thinking in terms of keeping a travel log. I wasn't corny enough to call it a travel blog. You will be blogging with this theme of the travel log in mind. You won't be traveling directly to Latin America this semester, but we want to think about the observations that we make and how we can write those down in a way that is culturally sensitive, that will help us to better understand other people on their own terms. People like Alexander von Humboldt are known for their very detailed observations. He was an observer of Latin America who spent time across the region in South America, Central America, and Mexico between about 1799 and 1806. He documented in great detail the flora, the fauna, the people, the customs that he came across. Maps like the one in the center of this slide were based on his observations. He also, though, had that sort of imperialist mindset in terms of naming things so that we can understand them and so that we can kind of bring them into our worldview and under our control. Indigenous people, of course, resisted that. But as we write about our observations of Latin America, I want us to keep that in mind. We need to think about the kind of continued legacies of colonialism across the region. And I just pulled up a blank map, which I'll tell you about in a second. How we relate to that, and how through the study from afar, either through maps, through articles, through podcasts and videos, we can understand these people on their own terms, so that we can have a better kind of cultural relationship to Latin America. Here's a blank physical map of the region. I want you to take just a minute, and I'll pull up the political map as well. This has the outlines of the various nations in Latin America. If you're indulging me, please pause the video for a second now and see how many of these places you can define. What physical features could you fill in on the map on the left? Which nations, which capital cities or major cities could you identify on that blank map? Whether or not you took the time to pause the video, let's see, how you did. This map fills in some of the key areas in Latin America in terms of the physical geography, from water features to major mountain ranges like the Sierra Madres in Mexico, the Andes that traverse the western section of South America, the Amazon basin, the Llanos of Venezuela, and so on. These are, again, important locations that I hope, at least some of these, you will explore and identify as you create your tour on the Google Earth Tour Builder for the geography assignment. I've actually had quite a good time creating the example that I've shared with you. You've probably noticed over the past few weeks it's been a work in progress, as I've been working on finishing an example for you to look at. You can choose some of the places that I did. Please don't just reproduce all of the places that I chose for mine. The point here is for you to think about what places are important for us all to know in Latin America, but also which places are most interesting to you. Which places would you like to explore? And as I've worked on that assignment, I found, I want to say something about Caracas, for example. I end up spending quite a while reading about it, finding articles and pictures, so that I can further explore the area and at least get to know the place to a degree, as much as I can with a short assignment like this one. So I'm hoping that's what we'll have in mind as we think about the ways in which these places have been defined historically, and created as, I should say places, spaces defined historically, created as spaces. And I keep saying the words wrong. Those last few slides, I just want to take you through quickly to show how the understanding of geography developed over time from the European perspective. You'll probably notice this is South America, Central America, Mexico, and the modern day US, North America. Doesn't look anything at all like what you would find on Google Earth, for example. Also, this is Baja California, believe it or not. It wasn't known whether or not it connected to the mainland until people meaning European people, actually walked the distance here to see that, wait, there's land over here. We need to redraw our maps. This was something that early explorers of New Mexico found themselves having to do, had themselves rewriting different maps. I apologize for that. Let's see if I can, it'll disappear. Another Slack group that I'm part of. Here's a more advanced map from 1587, so just like almost 40 years later than the map we just looked at. It looks a bit better. It's more filled in. It still looks a bit distorted. So again, people over time have worked hard to try to define these places and spaces. We have a great opportunity with all of the technology that we have to be able to explore Latin America from afar. That was an advantage that the imperial rulers of Spain did not have. All of those areas highlighted in red, for example, were controlled by Spain, this little country over here in Iberia. They also controlled their East Indies, as they called them, which was essentially the Philippines and a few other islands over here. Imagine trying to do that before the kinds of technology that we have. Those are some of the reasons that it was so difficult for Spanish imperial administration, but it's also part of the reason that the places that were then Spanish America or Portuguese America, in the case of Brazil, were able to become the very unique, and it's just part of the reason, but were able to become the unique cultural sites that they are today. So I hope that this kind of survey of geography will be helpful as you think about the places you might like to explore in your tour. And give you some questions that you can continue to think about as we press forward with our study of Latin American geography.